Hello and welcome to Health Talk. I'm Dr. Manny. What if I told you that a cup filled with worms might prevent type 1 diabetes? Sounds crazy, no? But there might be something to this science. Joining me now to explain is the Chief Medical Officer of Coronado Biosciences, Dr. Karin Hehenberger. Welcome, Doc. And as I say, sounds crazy, no? Worms to prevent type 1 diabetes. Let's clear up, I think, for a lot of folks, what kind of worms are we talking about?
So TSO stands for Trichuris suis ova. And so it's really not worms, it's the pig whipworm ova. So these are the eggs from the pig whipworm. And we give them in solution. So it's essentially a liquid that is a saline solution. And these eggs are microscopic. You can't see them. They're odorless, tasteless. But
they grow from an ova, which is an egg, to actual little microscopic worms?
That's right. So you can never see them. Even in the stool.
But for a lot of people, even if they don't see them, they're going to say, I don't want to have worms in my belly. But I get it. No. So how do they work? How does having these microscopic worms in your flora of your intestines help you prevent diabetes?
So this is all based on the hygiene hypothesis. So what is interesting is that while we are now able to combat infections, the infections that used to kill us before hygiene was implemented in the kind of Western world, we are now seeing an increase in autoimmune disease. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. It's a chronic disease where the body itself, the immune system, is hurting itself. And in the case of type 1 diabetes, it's the pancreas. The pancreas is the organ that produces insulin. It secretes insulin from the beta cells. So by having these pig whipworm ova that grow into microscopic larvae that you cannot see, you're resetting the immune system. So you're resetting the balance so that instead of attacking itself, the immune system is attacking what it's supposed to attack, which is the outside, bacteria, virus, and so on.
So what other diseases has been treated by this worm therapy?
Yeah. So it started out in inflammatory bowel disease and Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, where we have proof of concept data from early studies in the 90s, and that's where we are also conducting our large phase 2 trial. We're also doing trials in ulcerative colitis at NYU and one more place. We're also looking at MS, multiple sclerosis. So we have proof of concept data in multiple sclerosis, a small study from the University of Wisconsin, and we're conducting a larger study there as well. There's another study in MS in Europe at Charité in Berlin. We're also in rheumatoid arthritis, also in Europe. And most recently, we actually started and announced a study in autism.
I was going to ask you about that. Because I have an autistic child myself, and I know that the immune aspect of autism is very important.
Yes, and this is a recent finding.
Right.
It has not been discussed much in the past, but there's a lot of data right now that in autism there's an immunology component.
What makes you think that is going to help with type 1 diabetes? What base research have you done?
Yeah, so in type 1 diabetes, number one, it is an autoimmune disease. We know that for a fact. We know that this disease is a typical autoimmune disease because before the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, which is based on glucose, measure glucose, if the sugar is high, you have diabetes. That's the definition. But we know that in type 1 diabetes, the disease starts much earlier than that by the immune system starting to hurt itself. And we can measure that through autoantibodies. So we know it's an autoimmune disease. That's number one. Number two, there are many animal experiments done now. There's a special animal model for type 1 diabetes called the NOD mouse. And in the NOD mouse, we can prevent type 1 diabetes from happening in this mouse by using helminths, and TSO being a helminth.
All right, you have a clinical trial going on right now. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so our large clinical trial, which is the Coronado-sponsored trial, is called TRUST-1. And this is a trial in Crohn's disease. We are enrolling 220 patients over about 65 sites in the U.S. In parallel with that, we have another clinical trial in Europe, another about 250 patients in Europe in 5 countries. So those 2 trials are our 2 large trials.
So that's going on right now?
Yes.
Now, you also are going to start a new trial on the treatment of type 1 diabetes.
Yeah.
When is that happening?
So we are actually looking at 3 different kinds of trials in type 1 diabetes. We're very excited. So these different trials are 2 in prevention of type 1 diabetes, where we are able to identify people at risk. And here we are targeting young children, because in children the immune system is still, it's not static. So we believe that we can make more of a change in children than we can in adults. So we're targeting children at risk for developing type 1 diabetes to reset the immune system so that they never have to develop this very difficult disease. The other trial that we're looking at is in children and adults who have been recently diagnosed. So this is called recent onset, where there's an intervention trial. And the reason why we're also looking at this is that if we can prevent further destruction of the beta cells in the pancreas, we can reduce the need for some of the insulin that is required in type 1 diabetes.
All right, so the aim is to look at that. Now, where does the FDA stand on all these trials? Are they monitoring? Are these sponsored FDA trials?
Yeah, so we have worked very closely with the FDA. We have an IND open for our Crohn's indication, and the other trials that we're considering are all investigator initiated. So that means that the investigator has to apply to start a trial in the different indications, type 1 diabetes being one of them.
Okay. A lot of folks are going to be asking questions because, again, it's very difficult for people that are not into the science world to understand larvae. But these worms have, or these larvae have a short life. In other words, they get ingested, they grow, they die off.
Yeah. So the good thing about our product TSO is that the human being is not the natural host. It is the pig that is the natural host. So in the human being, there's only a very short lifespan, and that's why these larvae do not develop into full-grown reproductive worms. So they cannot produce additional ova, and they cannot become more. They can't grow. They can't colonize the intestine. So it's actually the perfect drug because it's only there. I think I would compare it to a drug patch. For about 2 weeks, it sits there, exerts its effect on the immune system. And then it dies off. Then it dies off, and it's completely
And then you keep repeating
digested.
that, you keep exciting the immune system to focus in a different direction,
Exactly.
away from your body. On a final note, this is a very personal story to you because you suffered from type 1 diabetes, right?
Yes, I was diagnosed as a 16-year-old, and I was a very active 16-year-old. I was playing tennis almost professionally at the time in Sweden. And I was diagnosed, and it really changed my life. I mean, in a good way, too, because I went to medical school and studied and also got a PhD in diabetes. But I spent a lot of my career focusing on understanding diabetes. But then 20 years later, I developed complications to diabetes, serious complications to diabetes, and it went very fast, and I required a kidney. So my father, who is my hero, gave me one of his kidneys so that I did not have to go on dialysis and be suffering a lot. And then 9 months after the kidney transplant, in January of 2010, I received a pancreas. So in my case, I've seen how it is to live as a young person, teenager, with no diabetes, then struggling for 20 years with diabetes, and then having the complications. So if I can do anything to prevent this disease in anyone else, it is my goal in life.
Well, I tell you, I think that this is one of the most fascinating stories that we have done here at Fox. And it's fascinating because you're attacking this from an angle where you are telling the body how to heal itself. And I think it's a wonderful story, and I think it's very important. So that's why I wanted you to tell everybody out there, where can people get information?
So you can get information from our website, coronadobiosciences.com, and also from clinicaltrials.gov, where the trial is registered.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's a great honor. I'm going to have you here as soon as you have some data from the trials, because I think a lot of folks out there are going to be very interested in knowing exactly how the trial is going and if this is going to be something that is going to work for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. And if you have any health questions, you can send an email here to Fox at drmanny@foxnews.com. Until next time, I'm Dr. Manny.